Hello, everybody. Welcome back. It is Tuesday, February 27th at 2:46 p.m. and we are reconvening this performance oversight hearing. We are now turning to our government witness, Lindsay Appiah, the Deputy Mayor for Public Safety and Justice. Welcome to you and your team. And as you know, it is the tradition of this committee to swear in all government witnesses who appear before it. If members of your team are going to be answering questions, can you please state your name and position for the record?
Nicole Peckham, Deputy Mayor Appiah's Chief of Staff.
John, it's Agency Fiscal Officer for DMPSJ.
Sure, thank you so much. Good afternoon, Chairperson Pinto, members and staff of the Committee on the Judiciary and Public Safety. I'm Lindsay Appiah, Deputy Mayor for Public Safety and Justice. Thank you for this opportunity to offer testimony on the performance of the Office of the Deputy Mayor for Public Safety and Justice, DMPSJ, during fiscal year 2023 and fiscal year 2024 to date. DMPSJ provides oversight of the 12 district agencies and the DC National Guard that comprise the Public Safety and Justice Cluster to ensure they're efficiently and effectively meeting their core critical agency mission and functions, working together across our government to advance public safety and justice priorities, and coordinating with our local, regional, and federal partners to enhance the safety of our city. The missions of the agencies of the Public Safety and Justice Cluster are dynamic, complex, yet interconnected. Each plays a critical role in the overall health and functioning of our public safety and justice ecosystem, which is centered around prevention, intervention and enforcement, accountability, and rehabilitation. Every day, more than 10,000 dedicated public servants work in our cluster agencies to improve the quality of life in our district neighborhoods. I would be remiss not to acknowledge their dedication and commitment to the residents and visitors of the district and offer my deepest thanks for their constant hard work. We literally could do nothing without them. The mayor continues to charge the entirety of our government with focusing on driving down crime and working to enhance the safety of those we serve. We're acutely aware that there is nothing more fundamental to the flourishing of our city than public safety. This means that DMPSJ's priorities in FY23 and FY24 to date have been on rebalancing our public safety and justice ecosystem to ensure that all residents and visitors are safe, victims of crime experience justice, those that harm our community are held accountable, and that we invest in rehabilitation and prevention programs and initiatives aimed at stopping crime before it's committed. In FY23, one of DMPSJ's primary focuses was on supporting the PSJ agencies in identifying and improving performance of core functions. DMPSJ's emphasis was on getting back to the basics. One of the most critical components of this process was working to ensure stable, competent agency leadership. In addition to me as the new deputy mayor, we also identified interim or permanent leadership during FY23 and FY24 to date for OVSJG, OUC, DFS, ONES, DURS, MPD, and HCMA. Our PSJ directors are national leaders in their fields, and their leadership has allowed us to achieve a number of gains. In May 2023, Dr. Diaz assumed interim leadership of DFS. With his scientific expertise, experienced leadership, and the hard work of the professionals at DFS, in December 2023, DFS received news that following an extensive evaluation, ANSI National Accreditation Board assessment of the lab identified 0 nonconformities at the lab and recommended that the forensic biology and forensic chemistry units of the lab be reaccredited. We're confident that the agency has a plan moving forward to get the remaining units accredited, employees certified in their areas of expertise, and continuous quality improvement to maintain scientific rigor. Additionally, in July 2023, the mayor nominated Chief Smith to serve as the chief of MPD. Chief Smith's leadership at MPD has had an immediate impact. She made it a priority with leadership that she wants to see officers out in the community, and she started a robbery prevention task force. This task force deploys officers and resources with more precision in response to active crime taking place. Officers are making more arrests, which is the first part of the system to hold those who commit offenses accountable. This task force's work will transition into the Real-Time Crime Center, which is slated to be operational at the end of this month. In FY24, DMPSJ will continue to prioritize supporting our agencies to help them meet their mission-critical agency functions effectively and efficiently stewarding public resources and trust, and serve our residents and visitors with purpose and care. In FY23 and FY24 to date, DMPSJ has also worked on making the city safer by coordinating interagency initiatives focused on reducing crime and increasing presence in our neighborhoods that not only help residents be safe, but also feel safe. In FY23, DMPSJ continued to provide oversight and support for two task forces, the Multi-Agency Public Safety Task Force and the Multi-Agency Nightlife Task Force. In FY23, the Multi-Agency Public Safety Task Force supported various neighborhoods on Wednesdays and Thursday afternoons by bringing together district agencies and our federal supervisory partners to address a host of concerns from illegal dumping to abandoned vehicles and more. In calendar year 2024, thus far, the Multi-Agency Public Safety Task Force is a force multiplier for MPD's Targeted Homicide Reduction Partnership Plan, Operation Thrive, targeted homicide reduction through intervention and violence elimination. Operation Thrive is focused on reducing homicides in 2024 by coordinating resources in the areas most impacted by homicide to protect life and stabilize neighborhoods historically plagued by violence. This is a whole of government approach and strategic deployment of personnel and resources in neighborhoods most severely affected by non-domestic homicides and contact shootings, Rosedale, Anacostia, and Washington Highlands. The Multi-Agency Nightlife Task Force brings a whole of government approach to address identified violent crime, quality of life, nuisance activities, and regulatory concerns that were occurring in 3 identified nightlife areas, U Street Northwest, H Street Northeast, and Connecticut Avenue Northwest corridors. Both multi-agency efforts continue to help us to decrease crime in the targeted areas and times in which they work. In FY24, DMPSJ assumed operational lead for the district's Safe Passage program. Safe Passage supports students as they travel to and from school. For school year 23-24, Safe Passage provides support to 48 schools in 8 priority areas, including 1 metro station. PSJ distributed approximately $8.5 million in grant funding to 4 community-based organizations, which funds 235 staff for this school year. Safe Passage ambassadors, trained and trusted adults from community-based organizations, are assigned to schools and work to build relationships with school staff, students, families, and community members. Notable changes to the program model this year included redefining and providing a uniform set of procedures for all Safe Passage ambassadors deployed in community and enhanced data reporting used to capture unusual incidents within the Safe Passage priority areas. Additionally, in calendar year 2023, PSJ also continued coordination of the public safety GO teams, which consisted of non-law enforcement government employees, credible messengers, community engagement specialists, violence interrupters, staff from the mayor's office and community relations and services, and others, to be present in hotspot neighborhoods during key holiday weekends. PSJ also coordinated resource pop-ups in schools and communities to meet the needs of most of our at-risk youth. More recently, DMPSJ supported the opening of the Safe Commercial Corridor Hub in Chinatown that will be staffed by multiple outreach teams that cover public safety, human services, behavioral health, and community relations. The Chinatown Hub, staffed by outreach teams, will be open Monday through Friday, 9 to 6. Staff will have direct insight and be able to respond more quickly to real-time challenges in community. Finally, DMPSJ very recently finalized grant agreements with recipients of the FY24 Safe Commercial Corridor Grant Program. DMPSJ is distributing approximately $1.1 million in grants to support public safety and public health evidence-based activities within the downtown, Shaw, or Adamsmore commercial corridors. We'll announce the grant recipients in the next couple of days. In addition to the programmatic efforts, my office spent a significant amount of time examining the district's legislative landscape in FY23 as well. This examination included our own assessment, but also meeting in many different forums with stakeholders and residents in all parts of our city across all 8 wards, representing all sectors. What was clear were there were gaps that required common sense policy proposals and a rebalancing of our public safety ecosystem, particularly around accountability for those committing crime in our city. In May 2023, Mayor Bowser introduced the Safer Stronger Amendment Act of 2023. We appreciate your leadership, Chairperson Pinto, in advancing the Prioritizing Public Safety Emergency Amendment Act of 2023 in July, which had immediate impact in uplifting and advancing justice for victims of crime and helping us to start to reverse unacceptable levels of crime and violence in our city. In October, Mayor Bowser proposed the Addressing Crime Trends Now Amendment Act of 2023 to address additional gaps in our system, and we're grateful that many of our proposals were included in your Secure DC Omnibus Amendment Act of 2024. We're grateful for your leadership and council's partnership in advancing Secure DC, which we believe prioritizes the safety of our community and sends a clear message. If you commit a crime in DC, if you hold a gun to someone in DC, if you bring violence to our neighborhoods, there will be swift and certain consequence. We must work with urgency to pass and implement common sense legislation that will continue to help us to rebalance our public safety ecosystem and make our community safer. I'd like to address a few points since I'm here on Secure DC, which we know council will take up for second vote on March 5th. First, drug-free zones. Drug-free zones will not allow MPD, as you have said, Chairperson Pinto, and you've heard MPD say, to break up any group of people in DC. They will allow the MPD chief to thoughtfully address open-air drug markets so that communities can reclaim public space. Additionally, this bill will not ban hoods or hijabs, but will give MPD a common sense tool to engage those wearing masks in our community who intend to do harm. We're calling on council to remove the amendment that added that will end the expansion of holding adults before trial who have been caught committing a violent offense. The expansion of the rebuttable presumption related to pretrial detention has been an important tool in helping us to increase the safety of our communities. As of February 26, 2024, we've seen a substantial increase in those charged with weapons offenses being held pretrial. We've seen a corresponding, which I can tell you, just this is not in here, but it's approximately 400% increase. We have seen a corresponding 28% decrease in assaults with dangerous weapons, which includes shooting offenses when compared to 2023. And actually, I'll say this, it's actually 30% today. When a person is caught committing a violent crime in our city, common sense requires that we ask judges to first consider keeping that person off the streets as they await trial. Also, we must keep the threshold for first-degree organized retail theft at $500. We must take seriously the effect that organized theft is having on businesses and residents who depend on those businesses. MPD and prosecutors must have tools they need to hold people accountable when they target businesses. As we reflect on what happened in 2023 with the state of crime, I'm fully cognizant that we cannot repeat last year. We must reduce crime and increase safety. When I look at the numbers for the first 45 days of 2024, there's reason for cautious optimism. We're experiencing decreases in homicide, assault with dangerous weapon, burglary, motor vehicle theft, and theft from auto when compared to this time in 2023. Violent crime is down 11%, and total crime in the district is down 12%. While it's early, we're making progress in helping residents be and feel safer, but I know there is much more work to be done. And I'm confident that with the continued hard work of our PSJ agencies and the partnership of council and our community, we'll continue to drive down crime and ensure our city is one in which everyone can flourish. Thank you for this opportunity to testify on my office's performance. I welcome any questions you may have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Deputy Mayor, and thank you to you and your team and everybody who works in the public safety cluster so hard every single day to keep our residents safe. We are all very grateful and appreciate the partnership. We're going to do 15-minute rounds for colleagues. I want to start, Deputy Mayor, you noted in your testimony and have talked a lot about kind of stripping back to basics, going back to basics with your operations. And it's clear that there's some things we need to be doing differently to reduce the violence that we're seeing in our communities. Can you give some examples of what going back to basics really looks like and what some of the coordination effort you've been engaged in bringing our agencies together looks like operationally on a week-to-week basis?
Sure. So the first thing I would say back to basics is making sure that you have strong leadership. And so that's why I started there, because as a deputy mayor's office, I believe it's our first priority to really support the agencies. And so, my directors who you've heard from will tell you that we have both individual meetings, cluster meetings, and deeply regular communication with them to identify what are challenges, what are issues, what are things that could use addressing in sort of central office, right? Type of budget concerns, staffing concerns, various things like that, because closest to the agencies is the directors. The other thing was we worked very early on. I asked them to identify the 5 core things that they must achieve. And a lot of that comes from statute. I'm a lawyer, right? So we did literally go back to the enabling statutes of some of our agencies and say, okay, these are the things you must do. And then we worked around doing data points around what it looks like and what's the right rhythm to measure how they're doing on that. Because some of them are in their KPIs and some aren't, right? So these are kind of the basic things. If you must do this, it's great that you're doing these other things, but we need to be measuring your progress on basic KPIs. And that's all of the 12 and National Guard agencies that we did that for. So we have a literal list and created in my office dashboards to look at on there's different frequencies, but we worked with them. These key things that we're measuring, whether it's for fire EMS, what is drop times at the hospitals? Like they have a lot of sort of nationally set ones in fire. But that's true at OVSJG. Are we getting grants out the door in a timely fashion, right? Like they're kind of a diverse group. OHR, what is case processing look like? Like we really created like a red light, green light, yellow light system to be like, which cases are in each category and how are they moving through there? So that's one piece, because it's really fundamental to me that they're meeting what they are required to do. And so that was one thing. You talk about coordination, and that's important. I've spoken in here that like basics mean using the tools we have. We have a lot of Teams chats and, like Teams chats that we communicate in. And so at a basic level, for instance, with the task forces this morning, I'll use an example so you really understand, an MPD officer in 5D, this had nothing to do with the task force, but people have learned to communicate in this way. One of our homeless residents, their tent burned. So she asked in that chat, can anyone help us with a tent? It seems basic, but through their DMHHS is on there. They got the encampment team out. They got a tent. They identified there was propane there. They've identified that they're going to go back and do a cleanup. Fire EMS jumped in and said, we'll go in and check the propane. It sounds really basic because it is. So some of the coordination really was me. I stay in those chats, because ultimately it's my job and my office's job to hold our agencies accountable for communicating and then following up. The other thing is too, there's some working across not just my agencies, yes, and not just across cluster, but with our central and OCA partners, for instance, in performance. If we are hearing from residents, 311 requests aren't getting answered. Right? Well, we have worked with them, for instance, in some of our Thrive areas, pull the 311 requests so that when we have all of the task force out, they can be doing them, right? And that I know they're all together, it can be tracked. And if they're not happening, then we're able to use these as kind of tests to figure out where's the gap. So these are kind of examples of different types of structures. There's a host of others, coordination meetings, I'm sure we'll get into, working with OAG and ones to try and bridge gaps, to try and bring communication, being an active member of CJCC, like these different bodies where all of our local and federal partners are, where I'm able to then identify issues that maybe we can work together on with council on legislation or otherwise. So I use it's a very broad set of things, but hopefully that gives you some examples of how we're doing that.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And when you talk about the chats, and some of it makes sense in such real-time needs and making sure that things aren't issues and people aren't getting kind of lost in the shuffle of so many of those needs, what does the follow-up look like? Is there a database that you're maintaining this information so that if somebody needs follow-up in 15 days or 30 days, that's not getting kind of lost in the matrix of active chat?
Yeah, that is like the role of, to me, the deputy mayor's office. They are the operational people in there. We then go and extract like the data. So we'll ask a simple thing like, after each engagement, please post your results. What did you do? What were issues you saw? So that we'll then go and track back. We then can work with performance, who is able to access 311 or otherwise to track, okay, did this get done in 30 days, 60 days? Are there still open tickets that we said we would get done? And that's sort of there's the operational people on the ground, then there's the deputy mayor's office, my office, pulling kind of the back end data. Then there's us bridging the gap to our partners in performance or other parts to really being like, is there a systemic breakdown? Like what is the systemic fix then? And what that really feeds into is the city administrator pulling together the deputy mayors and relevant people when we identified an issue operationally to figure out how to address it. So it kind of all feeds through from ground to deputy mayor to OCA to city administrator.
Thank you.
Yep.
So last year, the mayor issued an order for a district-wide review of violence reduction programs.
Yes.
What was the outcome of this order from what your office produced?
So we have included it so you can see what it is. It was a pretty extensive review where we looked at all of the report, like we started back again, like source documents to all of the different reports that have been done on the district, from Safer Stronger report in 2015, all of the CJCC reports, and then just sort of best practices, then met with CJCC, like credible messengers, all the various partners to say what is sort of best practice, what has been said about the district and what's happening, and put that together in a document that was filled with recommendations about a host of things. What do we need to do with these programs? What sort of starting what needs to be in contracts? What do we need to be measuring short-term, midterm, long-term? So it was a pretty comprehensive set of recommendations of how we can strengthen what we have and maybe some changes that we need to make. That fed a lot of our work in PSJ we worked, like I said, with a contractor who's Clint Lacey, but to look at that work and then also kind of his experience, right, with the city, with setting up Credible Messenger, and then his relationships to operationalize some of these things, right? So it takes time, right? Because we were in middle of contract cycles or otherwise, but some of that really informed how we built our safe passage RFP so that like we're starting to put into the contracts in place standardized metrics and requirements and expectations, and also really we've really stepped in, I'll just be honest, PSJ Central this year with VIs, right? To be like, okay, let's help add some infrastructure here and some data and expectation. And, I met with the providers, the providers, so that we could start to set the expectation of these various kind of best practices, the data that we need to be looking at, our expectations around all of that. And they've really been responding, but that was the processes, the evaluation, the recommendations, and then the things within our direct purview, we started adding into contract, and now we're sort of branching out into the agencies with requirements on contracts and others.
Okay. Are there a couple of things that stood out to you from that study that you think will be most useful in driving down gun violence in particular?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not a surprise to everybody that like one of the big things is that we talk a lot about coordination, and we do need to coordinate both at a ground level and then at a higher level, because we have a lot of different programs that people think are VIs, but they're really different. They have different goals, they have different models, they have different ways of operating. And we're trying to bring them all together into a continuum so they work together. But I don't think we were surprised by that. But like there's, if you do research or eat any of our reports, there was no model in which it's like, let's have 7 different types of things that we call a VI. I'm just, that kind of mushroomed into what it is, but that wasn't really original intent when you go back and look at all of these. And so that wasn't, to me, that surprising, but it certainly manifests. The other thing is again, like going back to all of the original source and what people say is best practice, like we've sort of picked and choosed like a menu of what we do. And so this back to the basics thing is something that was essential to us. Like, what are the core things VIs must do in order to reduce violence? Like, there's a host of things they can and are doing, but what are the things that really like more us to this will help us bring down gun violence? And so we've really tried to do some of those things. That's why it took us a while to start shooting reviews and coordination meetings, because we're like, we can have meetings, but they're not going to be effective if we don't get at like what's preventing people from kind of moving it forward. And I feel like we're making progress. I really do. It's not just a feeling. Like we do have a 30% reduction in ADW, and there's a host of things that go in that, but certainly like getting everybody on the same page has been part of that.
Okay. And we heard from one of our violence interrupters today that he feels like the spirit is different in the last couple of months, and that having a connection point to why the work not only matters, but how it fits in with the other public safety goals has been really empowering. And so that was nice to hear. We also heard from a number of folks today about concerns with safe passage. And so last year we shifted jurisdiction of safe passage from the Deputy Mayor for Education's office to your office. And so how has that been going? What are some of the things that you're doing to make sure that we're responding to the concerns when people say there might be a safe passage worker or 5 at our school, but they may be standing in front of the school. They may not be coming into the school building or have a relationship with their students. How are we addressing?
So the first thing is like, we've tried to define a lot of what a safe passage worker's role is, because I hear what people are saying about them not coming to school or otherwise. That isn't necessarily the role of the safe passage worker. And so there's still some communication and education to be done, but we started defining it for them. Some do go into school, but by and large, by the contract and the RFP, their job is to be along routes, which we mapped. We literally created interactive maps of what are the hotspots, and it took a little while, like we just sort of finished them up because we were working with the safe passage workers and schools to try and determine what are the real spots they need to be in, right? We understand that they can be helpful, and that there are sometimes people are confusing like one's leadership academy and all of these different things who are in school with safe passage workers, who we're saying your job is to be the eyes and ears outside or on the paths to get kids to school, because like that's sort of the first step. So if there's capacity, we understand the expansion to in school, but the first thing is getting them where they're supposed to be. And that's why we talk about a continuum, because some schools have credible messengers in them. Like DRS literally is working with some schools to have credible messengers, and people are still thinking that's safe passage. They're not. Like, you're just kind of equating all of them. I think a lot of people are and don't know the distinction. We're having them work together, but I think that was a big piece. And a lot of the changes we're like very formal in process, to be honest. Daily meetings are defined at certain times, monthly meetings, quarterly meetings, required trainings, site visits. A lot of things that I think were a little more free flowing are like, they're not rigid, but they're rigid because we want to have structure that people can count on, so that if there's a failure, we're able to identify the point of failure, right? So I definitely hear people. I think, there's like, people also want them to be violence interrupters. Well, to us, there's a difference between a trained violence interrupter and a safe passage worker who might be a caring adult, but they don't have training in VI.
What do you think that the role should be of the safe passage worker?
I think that they are part of the continuum. If you think of it, they are eyes and ears, like somewhat. One of the deterrents to crime, we do believe, is presence, right? Like having presence on a path both can deter violence, but also like, gets the kids. You can see someone in the green vest, say it's a safe person. There is some relationship building. And I will tell you that the assumption that every caring adult, whether VI or safe passage, knows how to engage with young people isn't true. We're doing training on that because we're finding like they care. They don't actually know how to necessarily engage young people in that way. So that their primary role is to be eyes and ears during these key periods of time, at different identified points where there's either identified issues in kids getting to school, whether there's been robberies or violence or otherwise, or we know kids are hanging out at the store instead of going to school, right? Like, so that is their role. They do some training, some VI training, but a violence interrupter has like, if you think of it as like we are trying to create a career ladder, to be honest with you, VI would be the next sort of point in that kind of career ladder of you get additional training in crew-based mediation, which isn't the same as your safe adult who might be just finding your way into that prevention space.
Sure. Okay, thank you so much. I'm gonna have some more questions on that, but I'm gonna turn to my colleague at large Councilmember Christina Henderson, who's also a member of the committee for a 15-minute round.
Thank you, Chair Pinto, and good afternoon, Deputy Mayor. I'm going to pick up a little bit on the conversation that you were having with Councilmember Pinto. A couple of weeks ago, I had an opportunity to sit down and talk to some folks who do the safe passage work, a couple of violence interrupters and those who do school security work. And it was told to me that apparently there's this feeling out there that I hate the safe passage program, which I don't. I just have questions about it. I have questions about it because I don't feel like when it was rolled out, that it was properly communicated what the role of these individuals would be. It was, these are individuals who are going to be posted on particular routes, and it's going to provide safety to students. No one ever said that the role of this worker was limited to see and report, as you sort of talked about, eyes and ears. And so I think the perception when people see them out just seeing and reporting, but not engaging, where there are incidents that occur outside of the school boundary line, but still within their particular path, that's a little bit of where some of the concern comes in. I actually think that we have seen models, whether it be Johnson or Dunbar or even with KIP, that it can work very well, but there are some things that need to be in place in order for these partnerships, I think, to work very well. And some of that starts with communication between who the contractors are and the school community. As we think about, I guess we can't necessarily change the program sort of going midway, but is it required that whoever the contractor is for the safe passage program for a particular site actually meet with school leadership?
It is. So at this, one of the things that we did was intro meetings, because we ultimately, as the grantor, are like, okay, we are the kind of nexus. We don't just, so whatever it was before, I can't speak to, but the CBO is not a rogue element now where they get to decide what they do. They don't, right? So we set a perimeter where our office sets up meetings between the school leaders and the CBOs and whoever their safe passage workers are going to be.
Okay.
So that was something that we thought was really important, because there are some schools who love them in the schools, and then there were some schools who were like, who are these people in my school?
Exactly. Yes.
I don't know.
I've
this
definitely
person.
heard that from folks who are like,
who
I don't know
is
who you
this?
are. You're just here.
You're
Nobody
somebody
ever
in my school.
introduced you.
Yeah.
And so there's sort of that culture piece. Who do the ambassadors directly report to at the end of the shift? So, right, you've been observing what's the reporting structure, and is the reporting structure too cumbersome?
So what we try, that we don't want them to have to be doing long reports and stuff, because they're not going to do that. So we've created literally there's actually again, kind of chats that they will enter for their school, cluster chats where it's this is something we saw. Because the reason they have to do that is because it's going to feed into a 1 p.m. law enforcement call with law enforcement partners, where if we need to make adjustments, or we need VIs or something, we need to know that. So a lot of this is live kind of communication. Then there is a report out to whoever their site supervisor is. We created a very simple, and when I tell you it's simple, it's a simple Google form they can do on their phones for any incidents. So that then feeds into the back end, into a back end, which is just a really quick, this
Okay.
was the incident that we then track.
Does the back end then go for the school leaders?
So that would be we would need to communicate that to the school. They don't get all of it
See,
necessarily.
that's where I feel like some of the breakdown might be, right? Because if I'm a principal or assistant principal or whatever, and you all notice an incident that occurred at the Metro, but I don't learn that information until the next day, then I already had an incident in my building that started out there, that if I had had that information just a little bit sooner, I might have been able to intervene on that front, if that makes sense.
No, that makes perfect sense. And I would say the vice versa is true, that we tend, for better or worse, we tend to communicate more with schools than they're communicating incidents to us. So we actually, because there's a feedback loop that is there is a breakdown this way as well. And so we're working on like, is there a tool, and this we're working with HCMA, that we can use? So for instance, they created something called Protect DC that's supposed to be for gun, but like active shooter school.
Yep.
That's not really the type of issue we necessarily have. Can we utilize that to have a regular communication feedback? Because there's going to be a gap somewhere, right? Like
Yeah.
because of all of the, like we're trying to figure out how to close those gaps, because you're right. Real-time information is the best because then we can mediate, and
Mhm.
that needs to be both ways.
I totally agree with that. I would say, let me ask this.
Yes.
Is that you and your deputy mayor role be the convener?
Yeah.
To bring together and not just include DCPS, because the charter
Oh, no.
schools feel left out. They feel like they don't actually know what's going on in community, because even for MPD or violence interrupters, their immediate thing is like, let me get in contact with DCPS. And so they feel like they're getting the information secondhand. They may not even know who the commander is in their neighborhood
Yeah.
or having those things. And what I understand is in the past, I'm saying it's like multiple peoples ago, there used to be a meeting
Yep.
where it's like all of the school leaders together, and it literally was like, here is Commander so-and-so, introduce
Yep.
yourself, take down my number. Here is blah, blah, blah. Here, introduce yourself, take down my number. I think even that could go a long way in
Sure.
sort of establishing these connections and relationships, because I feel like we think that we're providing resources to schools and communities, and they'll say, but nobody ever communicated with us. I don't know who that person is. That person is just there. They're not really adding any value. When in fact, we have seen examples in other school communities where when everybody comes together, it actually works out.
Yeah. So can I say this? So I completely agree. So I've met with a number of different public charter schools. I'll use Digital Pioneers as an example, because I went over and met with them. And we were sort of laying out this structure of one of the pieces that sort of makes DCPS easier is they have kind of like that centralized Ricky Brown, right? DCPS school security.
Yeah.
And because the public charter schools they don't have that same like,
I know, but that's the life we live.
hey, no, I know. So what we were talking about is how can we create that for them? Like
Okay.
basically because it's very difficult to communicate with each LEA, like, because there's a lot of them, right? Like, and so that does create some of the breakdown. So I completely agree with you in having those conversations, and it does fall on me. The mayor is having a meeting with school leaders again, like the principals of middle schools and high schools for DCPS and charter schools on the 7th. And I'm sure we'll hear the same thing. And
Yeah.
like,
They want to kind of be in the
Yeah.
know, but let me shift because my time is running.
okay.
I want to ask about funding for this. Okay, so for FY24, Safe Passage is funded through a one-time increase of 3.8 million in local, 5.2 million in ARPA.
Yep.
How are we thinking about funding this in terms of the long term? And I know this is questions that have come up with these schools too, because
Yeah.
well, they put school security on ARPA and ARPA's leaving. So
There was always going to be some things with ARPA that were like, this needs to be funded locally. Like, there's no question that safety and the safety of our young people is a primary import. So I can't get ahead of the mayor on the budget, but I can tell you that there is a high level of commitment to ensuring that our
I'm reading
kids
between all of your lines.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. So we noticed that in the pre-hearing responses of the 235 positions funded by the Safe Passage grants,
Yeah.
only 179 of them are for the ambassadors. I don't know how to ask this without just sort of asking it directly, but who are these other 80 people that we're paying for? And is there any discomfort for your office in that we are literally funding entire organizations with this grant, as opposed to the rules that we have in place for some other
Yep.
grants?
No. So, I mean, I need like to figure out if it's actually 80. I don't feel that at all. We worked very closely in the RFP process with OVSJG. They are really our administrative partner on the grant side
Okay.
to make sure that like that anything that was submitted was real, because there was a lot of that, right? Like, why I got to fund your full office? Like, you're like, why
are we funding your
your
executive
rent?
director and your rent?
Right.
And yes.
So I feel very confident that that isn't the case. I need to check to see if there's, maybe we haven't filled all of the ambassadors, but I feel like this is something that's important to me, that
Okay.
the money go towards the people on the street primarily, and that the only thing we fund when it comes to program managers or all of those things is what is absolutely necessary for the program.
Okay.
So I can get you the full breakdown, but I feel confident that this was something that we went back and forth with them with a
Okay.
fine tooth comb.
I would love to do that because I'm going to have a situation, I know specifically for like the Commission on Arts and Humanities, they have a particular rule. No, your grant can't be more than 50% of the organization's budget.
That's right.
And so if they look and see, oh, wait, but OBSJG is basically funding whole organizations, I don't, let's just try to,
100%.
Okay,
Like, I'm not-
everybody get
no,
on the
I was
same
like,
page.
No.
all right,
Like,
let's turn to the parole board
okay.
or not.
Sure.
So in July of 2020, we basically said to Delegate Norton that we needed 2 years to get it together. Then we said, now we need 2 more years to get it together. You guys setting your pre-hearing responses. Unfortunately, the relevant entities could not reach a majority opinion on how the structure of the board or on the authority, roles, and responsibilities of the board. So what are the next steps here?
Yeah, so just so you understand what that means is the executive basically did all we could do. We brought in experts. We asked them to come up with a couple models for people to
I know we
decide
paid a
on.
lot of money.
I know. And what it came down to was there's a lot of stakeholders with very different opinions about what this should be. So we brought it to CJCC and people could not, it was like literally polar opposite decisions of what they should be doing. For the executive, what we said at the time is we can't advance legislation on something when the stakeholders, right? Like on the one side, you have public defender services and others, and the other side, whoever would not agree on a model, would not. Like we
Okay.
gave 2 options, we chose one. So that is really what happened. And I communicated that because we didn't to some of the stakeholders who were like, oh, that kind of makes sense because we understand this group.
Sure. And then understanding the group of stakeholders, they're never going to be on 100% on the same page. So I think my question is, who then makes the deciding factor? Or
So-
are we just going to live in this limbo?
No, I mean, it could be, so ultimately, right, like there would need to be 2 levels of legislation. And so we were kind of asking, quite frankly, council as well, what would you tolerate? Because if you have 2 opposing sides, because we actually wrote the legislation, just going to tell you,
Okay.
like either way, and it's like, who would you go with? This was not in this particular
Mhm.
iteration of the committee.
I think
But-
I would say this. I have
can't be
found that
executive.
sometimes people have thoughts about things. And until you write something down and give them something to respond to, you're going to just keep going around in the wheels and the wheels and the wheels.
So we did though. I just will say that the executive did. And then we got reamed, quite frankly, by partners for not being collaborative and for advancing, like, how could you write legislation? And we were like, we had to without actually having consensus. That happened in our CJCC space.
Okay.
So I'm
Oh,
telling you
okay.
for
Got
real,
it. Okay.
like, and we were like, okay, I don't know what we're supposed to do here, to be honest with you.
Okay. So what's your next steps?
So, I mean, at this point, right, like it's kind of that legislation exists, both the federal and the local.
Okay.
And I don't know that it's very favorable with our congressional partners right now.
And I'm not saying that the atmosphere is particularly ripe for this type of a movement, but I do feel like it is a key part that is missing to our judicial system that we just need to address. Let me move on. Okay, DFS.
Yes.
One of the consequences of the accreditation being revoked was that we have to retest about 10,000 cases over a 10-year period. My understanding is that there was an agreement that the district would do this.
Yes.
I imagine we would be contracting this out.
Yes.
Okay. And who is the responsible implementing agency? Is that a DFS or is
No,
that you
it's
guys?
DMPSJ. And I will tell you that we put out the solicitation twice, did targeted outreach, and no one responded. That's why. So if you look at our surplus, we had a $1.7 million surplus,
Yep.
which we said is because of this, because we worked with USAO and everybody to try and take it off, try it again. And there was no
Okay.
response. So that really is kind of what
Yeah.
happened there.
And, I think that people can have the frustration levels on that, but I've seen that happen with both DYRS in the residential and DBH in the residential. I can't make people apply, but we need to figure out perhaps what is the reasoning why some companies are hesitating. And it could be capacity of their own
Can I
testing.
just say, I think part of it is again, where we came up with, we tried to accord what USAO wanted and what PDS, like, and the defense bar wanted, right? Came up with, we're like, you got to simplify this. This is too like, and even with kind of doing that twice, it's still
Did
people,
we do a RFP or a RFQ?
we did, I don't, the RFP, OCP put it out, whatever the right, like.
Well, it's different because one would say we're putting up 100 or we're putting up 1.7 million. What can you do? And it could be that that wasn't enough money for somebody to be enticed. But if we put out an RFQ asking requests for qualifications, that's different because then companies are presenting and saying, here are my qualifications for being able to
I
do this
just,
work.
to be honest with you, think there's a limited scope of who could do this type of work. You're
Okay.
looking at law firms or others, and this is a issue we have. How does the district secure legal representation? It's not that attractive. I mean, it just isn't for like for a host of reasons. So that was some of our thinking, but that's, yes, I hear you. And we had done, like, tried to do some like pre-hearing, like conference, like let's have some.
Let's have some conversations.
Yeah, we did all
Like
of those
date
things. People were
people
like
and
crickets.
see if they like us. I don't know, but the point is we got these cases and we got to figure out what the point is there. Chair Pinto, I have to run downstairs. I have one more question if that's okay with you. In your cluster, you have a lot of vacancies. DFS director, ONES director, HCMA director. How are we sort of navigating finding some permanent directors of these?
I mean, so those are all they're all active. I mean, I will say that obviously with DFS, right, like we want to kind of hold the fort, to be honest with you, because they're stable right now.
Yeah.
But both we're in the process of interviewing and they are very priority, HCMA and ONES. And so we're moving through the process. And that's what I can say is they're
Okay.
very priority.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Henderson.
Thanks.
So Deputy Mayor, I want to go back to some of the coordination conversation.
Sure.
We heard some testimony today from some of our advocates in the domestic violence space, and they have done some work to identify individuals at greatest risk for perpetrating domestic
Yes.
violence. How does that work intersect with your work and the People of Promise and making sure that lists of high-risk individuals that the city is identifying or that advocates are identifying are streamlined and that we're providing consistent services to those individuals?
Yeah, so I think the advocates certainly on one side work with MPD. Like they have a relationship there with the kind of MPD's domestic violence side of the house. And so that's one piece. Where I heard the earlier conversation, where there's been kind of like discussion with me is sort of a requirement of DBH and DHS participate, which is kind of beyond the scope of what I can require, right? So I think the information sharing, I'm not sure that that is as difficult. I heard them sharing information with me, like certainly we can find, a mechanism to do that. But to me, it seems most important for them to share that with MPD. People may believe, I heard about violence interruption, like we've spoken about how to do some training, but that primarily is crew-based violence. And so it might be some intersectionality and we really do need to look at that. But in some respects, MPD becomes kind of the linchpin because we get so much information for coordination meetings or otherwise through MPD for our gun violence work, which I think you're kind of talking about how this intersects. They do become a linchpin more than me. Right? Because as a deputy mayor, I'm not really supposed to be this operational. I shouldn't be the keeper of the information of the lists or otherwise. There really should be a home in an agency. I help coordinate, like I help to try and bring everybody together, but
Who should be?
I believe that there should be an agency identified. When it comes to domestic violence, like I said, a lot of this MPD does become the linchpin. When we're talking about some of the more relational things, I do think there's a gap and I'm not quite sure, quite how to fill that, because what the discussion was is honestly with OVSJG, how do we make that work? Part of it could be in the grant process, which there wasn't an application, I believe, from DC Safe for grant. They wanted an MOA that required the agencies to participate in this process and OVSJG provide admin support, which is kind of outside of what OVSJG does. They don't really provide administrative support directly to grantees in the way that this was structured. So when there's questions about that, I was trying to figure out, how do I do this? Because what they were also looking for is streamlined services from DHS and DBH, which we know a host of people are looking for. And I, in my capacity, can't require DBH and DHS to provide streamlined case management and support. That's outside of my role. That is, quite frankly, I could work with Deputy Mayor Turnage, right, who oversees those agencies. So I'm always trying to find like where's the right lane without assuming too much direct operational responsibility, because I can't oversee if I'm administering so much, quite frankly. And my office is an office of, I think it's 12 or 14 at any given point in time. We're doing a lot of different things right now. I'm asking a lot of them. So I'm sensitive to that as well. And it's not for a lack of prioritization. It's how do we make all of this work, all of its priority. But if there's a relationship where you recognize people are at high risk with MPD, they also have a host of relationships with agencies as well. And if they came to me and said they needed support, as my agencies do, then I can do that.
So going back to the reviews and the chats that you were talking about, some of the examples that you gave were for agency needs outside of your cluster.
That's correct.
DMPSJ,
Yep.
DMHHS.
They're all in there. The
DHS,
WA,
DBH.
everyone's there.
So what does that follow-up look like when in reality, people's needs are not siloed within the clusters and how we define them in the district government? But it is clearly so related to our public safety goals. And so who should be dealing with those operational needs and implementing those follow-ups?
I think it is really incumbent upon somewhat, I take responsibility to work with my fellow deputy mayors to figure out, right? Because when you're crossing clusters, there always still has to be someone who takes first, because the deputy mayor's offices are not going to be direct case management. Now, I will tell you, we, from the mayor on down, do a significant amount of kind of intervention on individual, like what happened there, what's going on there, in the same way as there's chats like with our operational people, like, we're kind of held accountable as deputy mayors and as leadership to follow up as well. But I would say like that kind of is the work of the deputy mayors to be like, this should be owned by this section of DHS. They'll be on first. That we oversee the agencies, but there's got to be, we have to be careful unless there's like a program like DME oversees out of school time grants, right? So they are directly providing service, to not assume too much of that, because the follow-up has to live with the agencies. Ongoing case management has to live with some agency, and what there has to be a determination is which one is on first for this particular. And that is the work that we do. When we see in a chat, like we oversee the juvenile critical incident protocol, because there was a gap. We're overseeing it, but ultimately we pull the agencies together. We created a protocol and there's defined follow-ups for them to do that someone in my office makes sure they're doing. And if they don't, it's brought to me, who then I either go to the directors to be like, people aren't doing it, or the deputy mayors to say people aren't doing it.
Right. So I hear you on the operations piece, because otherwise you could take on the entire work of the whole city.
Yeah.
Because everything could have a relationship to public safety. But in terms of those individualized cases, I'm interested in this practically. So if there's an agency that's identified as being the first mover, first responsible, how do we ensure that when they pass the case on to another agency, that person isn't getting lost in the shuffle? And then we find out a year later, if that person was either victimized or perpetrating a crime, we had access to this person and we lost them because there wasn't that oversight function.
I think that's where we have work to do, right? Is because that does happen. Like we've talked about various ways to do this, navigators, to have, for specific subsegments, if you think about it, like one's family support services, we're working to adjust what they do. Because for victims of gun violence who might need a host of case management services to stop retaliatory violence, one's is responsible, even though it might be DPH, all of these other agencies, they're at least responsible to be like, hey, did you guys check in with so-and-so, right? Because for that cohort, it's been determined to ensure that there's stabilization, right? And no retaliatory violence, you're the person who's going to make sure, not provide direct service. Because what happens is agencies start building micro agencies within themselves. Like now you're like a case manager and all this. And they also have one for SNAP over at DHS. Then they also with CFSA for like going to Family First Support Center. Then they're, right, you're to navigate, right? Like to help navigate through the system and to bring some cohesion, but different populations, that's different. Much of I would say with domestic violence, I would say it's DHS, right? Because they have within them, like that is a responsibility. And so if that's not happening, then we can say, Director Zeilinger, what's going on? Like this isn't, we've been brought several like cases because it will always come to my attention, a deputy mayor's attention, somebody that have fallen through the cracks and we can work on the systemic issue. But it's still, we have all of these populations that someone is primary. It just so happens that there's also oftentimes they're touching other kind of for other purposes, touching other places. And so I think there's work to be done. And we talk about it. We've talked about in here. Information sharing is difficult because of a number of privacy issues or, you know, kind of different things like that. So that's kind of ongoing work of like, what is the barrier?
Mhm.
Are we sharing information? Do we need some sort of agreement? Who is on first?
Okay, because it sounds like what you're describing could benefit from a buds person at a lower level that can cross agencies and report up to the city administrator or somebody, so it's not all falling on the deputy mayor's office when there is, let's say, a domestic violence related issue that really could benefit from DBH or DHS or MPD, but that it's not stuck in the silo of our cluster system.
Maybe, but like you know, I don't know how much ombudsmans oftentimes are able to like operationally get people to do stuff. So I do think in some respects it falls on the deputy mayors. I think we work with a lot of CBOs who is your granting agency. Like a lot of our work, you know, is brought to you through our advocate organizations who are given money to do certain work, and they have some sort of an agency contact. So if there's a failure point there, they also do sort of serve as an ombudsman, right? Because they're not the individual, they're the people through whom, right, it's working through. So I'm always wary of creating another kind of
Layer.
position. I would rather say, where is the failure point, and like, and I do believe that's our role. It's council's role to be like, we keep hearing this systemic issue. It's our agencies who are grantor agencies, which is a big part of how we do direct service, like where is it falling down? And so, I mean, I think that's what I would say.
Okay, thank you. No, that's helpful. And thinking about other kind of new ideas that have been stood up, how has the rollout been going of the 211 warm line to connect callers' families to a slew of district services that may be available to them that aren't as intuitive as your first, search?
I mean, so far, I think it's going well. Like the thing is, so you know, 211 in many respects is based off of 311, right? And 311, if there is one thing it's successful, I understand people are like, our tickets get closed without, like, that's a whole systemic issue we can work on. But the knowing of services and what to, like, that is, I mean, a lot of people call 311 or connect with 311. That model does work. I'm not sure. Sometimes I do think there's an information gap because we have so many like resources available that makes it difficult. So for some people, just the having one place to call really is actually helpful. I think that probably some of the challenges with 211 that we'll find are what I'm hearing from people. If your child is involved in some of, like, because we do have the Family First Success Centers and things where it's like resource-based. I think the harder challenge that we really are thinking through is for those young people, families who are calling because their young person is involved in criminal activity or some sort of activity that they think is dangerous. We have a challenge in how we actually provide services to them, which I think council's aware of, right? Like, because that is some of the like anxiety and parents is like telling you they have a gun, they didn't get arrested. What can you do? And 211, they can provide like access to, oh, here's where you get food. Here's where you get services. Here's like, let's get some mental health. But that piece is trickier. That piece is a trickier piece. And I think is the one that we're really like, how do we do respite? how do we work with court social services? Like, how do we get at that cohort? And so that's kind of the dichotomy. I think, yes, 211 is successful in giving people like, we have a lot of places you could go for a lot of different things in ease of access. But for that cohort that is like, well, what do you do? Like, hold my child. Well, I'm calm because my child's acting up, hold my child. Like those type of things, are real, are like right now a real challenge and something that we're working through.
Mhm. Okay. So where I want to go next. So I guess speaking of kids, how is the youth curfew going and what information have we been able to glean from those efforts?
Yeah, so the numbers aren't huge. Like, so, I mean, here's the thing is our goal was never to have huge numbers of kids being picked up by MPD and dropped off at the YSC. I would say the curfew pilot is working in this way. We've identified, I mean, sometimes it's just connecting with parents, right? Like, we signed so it's been 57 total, young people over the past, whenever we started it, which is not an insignificant number, right? Like, again, we don't want MPD rounding up kids. I would say that it's successful in that way where, I mean, we're picking up very young children who are out at like 2:00 in the morning, right? Like, so in the basic sense of that's deeply dangerous. A one young person we found under a tree in the rain, and he had run away from home for a week. And like the whole thing was just a lot. So we were able to connect with his family, with school, get CFSA involved, and figure out like what's happening here because the MPD officer saw him under a tree in the rain, right? Like I use real stories because like when we talk about how successful, you're like, well, that bothered all of us. Like it just did. We were like, this is unacceptable. How did this break down? Like what happened here? And so I think success looks like that too, because we were able to sort of unravel like a breakdown on the CFSA school MPD side where we're like, for a week, like this child's been kind of in and out, and really work with the family. And we did there on like, okay, they need some support. Like we don't want the child out of home if necessary. So I think we have cases like that. Some of them they really are like, parents didn't know where their child was. Like we had a group of girls who said they were somewhere and their mom got a call at 2:00 in the morning that they're at the YSC and she was like, they were supposed to be over here. So some of those things where it's like, this is unsafe, picking you up. And then there are some where it's like, okay, they had gotten disengaged from CFSA somehow. And I think the best partnership we've had is with CFSA, is the reconnecting young people with CFSA if we identify an issue, because they have like case managers or really social workers looking at these young people when they come into the YSC at times to be like, something's wrong here, right? Like this is not just like we picked them up. And that evaluation was kind of being made by MPD before. And our goal was twofold. Police officers need to be police officers. We're having being social workers, all these different things. And then also, they need a place they might be sitting, trying to get CFSA on the phone and all of that. That's been removed from them. So I would say that it's successful in that way, that those are 60 young people who should not have been out at 2 and 3 in the morning. Nothing good happens. I'm telling you, for young people when they're out on the street at that time, particularly, and we chose corridors where we're like, you don't need to be on U Street at, 2:00 in the morning. So I would say that. And so like, we have no intention of stopping that, but we also don't intend to like expand necessarily because we're not seeing, mass amounts of kids yet. We don't say what will happen in spring or summer, but yeah.
Yeah. So young people or older people.
Yeah.
Nothing good happens.
Everyone go home.
Everyone go home. So in your pre-hearing responses for the curfew, you noted that your office is not collecting data on outcomes for these youth. And this is something that concerns me as we think about not just making sure that we're protecting that child from getting involved in something that evening, but how can we follow up with them better to make sure that they're going to school that month? That they're not going to have the same type of issue. And so if your office isn't collecting that information, who is, or is anybody?
So that would be like a next step, right? Like the first step that we did was like work together with the agencies to come up with just this type of relationship of, we can call you, we can work together to figure out, is this child connected? That's actually pretty big. the next piece would be to track maybe some of the kids, like we could probably pull through CFSA or otherwise, like, okay, if they're CFSA connected, what happened? If they're not connected to the system in any way, that's trickier because we don't have a relationship with them that's legally mandated or otherwise. And, you know, it's challenging sometimes with kids who touch the system, let alone those who are coming in for this reason. For the reason of you were violating curfew. So how you track them through, you know, I think it's something we can work on with DCPS or others, but it also is, you know, we kind of task DYRS with this and technically like they deal with committed kids, you know, and we're looking for ways to really engage with young people at risk. Is it DHS? Is it ACE? Is it PASS? We're making referrals there. And maybe that's a place to track, but how we do this with non-system involved youth is a challenge because you can't just like share data. You can't require, there's all those things that I think people know to be true where it's like, well, we could share some data, but like they can't just necessarily share data with DYRS on any young person who might. There's some kind of parameters around how juvenile information is shared even. So next steps, what like
Okay,
definitely like
yeah.
a growth point.
Well, I appreciate some added focus on that because, you know, as we think about truancy and we think about missing kids, quite literally in some cases, I think the follow-up is really important. And maybe even as a condition of you getting picked up on curfew, that means we're going to follow up with you once a month for 6 months.
And that's something that we wanted, but remember that that young person would then need a probation agreement or CSSD or something, because for us, there's nothing right now where MPD, unless they're charging them with something, that then they become on probation and then there's a probation agreement. Otherwise, you know, there's not really any hook. And so that was something we taught, we're like looking at holistically, how do we get young people to, you know, who are at risk that we can't really technically require to do anything because we don't run CSSD. Like that's not under the purview of the executive to do things. And what is the consequence if they don't? Because right now, we know there's even challenges with consequences for young people with serious and violent offenses who might be community-based and don't do things. So,
Yeah. No, it's definitely a challenge, but I think
Yeah.
your point about the schools being responsible for follow-up is also a good one of, you know, perhaps a similar model, although we need improvements in this model too, of if there's, you know, a support team established for a child who's missing 10 days of school.
Yeah.
Perhaps similarly, there should be a support team established for a child who gets caught out past curfew.
Yeah, and these are definitely the conversations we're having across cluster, because like, yes, we've spent a lot of time on accountability for adults and looking at our system there. But certainly the mayor has said and has had us really looking at what's going on with our young people. And so that's been work with DMHS, DME, and DMPSJ, because we know that maybe more than any other cohort, young people are very holistic in the different things. And like, there are like a host of things going on with our young people. And so there'll be policy proposals. And in that, we are looking at like privacy issues and what's going on with truancy and like, you know, what's happening with referrals or not, like, so.
Okay. Well, I look forward to that continued conversation. And speaking of what's going on with our young people, what types of trends have you been seeing when it comes to young people being involved more and more in violent cases? And how do you think we should be better directing services in partnership with other agencies to get to kids sooner?
Yeah, so I think, you know, I talk about overall reductions, but one of the like really disturbing trends is around young people involved in violent crime. Last year, if you look at kind of the trend over time, year over year, the number of young people who are being involved in violent or arrested for violent offenses is going up every year. The young people being involved for gun offenses going up every year. Young people being arrested for violent offenses as their first offense continues to go up every year. And that sort of cuts against a trend that had been happening in the juvenile space of year over year decreases in arrests. You know, that's still sort of the case, but we're seeing increases in them being arrested for more violent offenses, right? More gun offenses. And that is a troubling trend. We had way too many kids shot last year. And because we do the juvenile critical incident, it was over 100 kids that were shot in the district. Like, that is not like an acceptable state of affairs for us to continue to go up in that space. So when we're looking at, it's by and large not adults shooting other kids. And truthfully, in our robberies and carjackings, they are representing the largest proportion of those arrested for those very serious offenses. That's troubling on multiple levels. One, because we don't want kids involved in crime. It's dangerous for them, it's dangerous for others. And we also know our community, it terrifies them because of the erratic nature of young people. They don't, their behavior is erratic. And so that is a challenge. And it's one that I think everyone recognizes. I think, the city administrator presented, at council breakfast, looking at what happened with our kids over time. Like, how did we get here? What happened in our ecosystem? And there has been a drastic shift. I worked at DYRS. When I started, there were 900 committed kids, but they were arrested for less serious offenses. There was a belief that that's the deep end of the juvenile. You're the rehabilitative agency. Here you go. And now there's been a shift away from that. So it seems like our kids are being supervised. I'll just say it by OAG. And I don't, maybe that's good. Maybe it's not. What is the rehabilitative services being offered for young people? Are we holding them accountable? Because young people more than anybody need boundaries. We made decisions about school discipline, and we hear school leaders being like, we can't really do anything. They know we can't suspend them. We can't do like anything to them. So they're engaging in more and more violent behavior at school. And then in community, they're like, we know nothing's going to happen to us. We'll write a letter or whatever. I'm just, I'll be honest about this. And so they're like, well, just risk it. I mean, that's really what I think is happening. And so I think, we as adults have to set what is appropriate behavior, and kids respond to boundaries. That is love. Discipline and boundaries for kids is love. They don't have the capacity to understand like what is socially acceptable right now because they have a lot of trauma and all these things that are untreated, but we're also not setting appropriate boundaries. We're treating them like adults. And we created a juvenile justice system to be rehabilitative, to say this is, and no matter what people say, the district system is the model for the country. It's not perfect, but our rehabilitative system, our deep end, is the model. So what I'm saying is partially, yeah, we need more kids at DYRS. We do. Because for better or for worse, if they're in community, we can't be clear what sort of rehabilitative anything. We don't know if they're engaging, if their families are now in, CBT or otherwise. We can't hold them accountable to go to school, which they need. So that's the first piece. We have to really examine, like, what messages are we sending through all of kind of our policy and our practical perspectives? And that is something we all are going to have to work on.
So I hear you, and I think that the backstop is really important, to be very clear of that there is a consequence when you break the law and when you harm somebody else. And as we look at the trends that we're seeing now, are there other interventions that you've identified that you are working to ramp up to support kids who are at greatest risk of committing violence or who are victimized of trauma and violence themselves in their own families or communities, so that we can wrap our arms around them earlier?
Yeah. So, I mean, while it's not in public safety and justice, because kids are holistic, the investments that are made in things like recreation for all, right? Like, a lot of times what our kids are actually looking for is a caring adult. And so one of the reasons we did recreation for all is that we know, like, this is a very practical one. There was a coach at Woodson who's like, if you give me money to feed them, I will keep these kids till 8 p.m. and then get them home. Right? Like, and then they'll be out of trouble. And so that was some of the thinking behind like a recreation for all, because you're like, okay, here's a grant, feed them. Like, if you're going to keep young people and be invested in them, we know that that actually matters. Because I don't know where I was recently, but they were talking about, yet again, the research says that the most important thing in keeping young people out of violence is a caring adult. Right? That just is a fact. So investing in out of school time really is an investment in prevention. The longer we can keep them with a caring adult. All the programs at DPR, there was a reason like 2 or 3 years ago. At the time, it was Director Hunter. We started like the Friday night hypes and stuff because they just needed a place to be. There is a reason we've expanded credible messengers into, they're working, for instance, at Johnson, because some of these kids just need a consistent mentor, right? They need that. They do. Someone being like, what are you doing? Like, you don't want to be involved in all of this, right? Like, so that will help a number of young people. It is us investing in, and we are working on this, like, how do we get kids in school? Because 12 and 13-year-olds now are involved in, I mean, we arrested a 9-year-old, a 9 and a 13-year-old. In that same week, we also arrested 2 12-year-olds for robbery, armed robbery, and these things where you're like, those are small children, in my opinion, right? So yes, the working to expand mental health and behavioral health supports in schools is part of that work. And then also, it is what you said, the warm line, and really looking at what's going on with families, because your 12-year-old or 9-year-old acting out, like, we work very closely with CFSA on this, because we're like, it may not be neglect where we're trying to break families up, but some support is needed there. And so I would say it's all of those pieces. That is prevention for young people, is mental health supports, getting like athletics and various arts programs, and just something where they have something to do that they want to, and then caring adults, investing in kind of all of those relationships.
Well, thank you for those examples. And I think that's why it's so important to do the follow-up with kids once they have been either taken in for curfew or arrested for something else. Because if we didn't get them in time to prevent the crime, at least we can back into some of the supports that they may need. And again, I know that's a lot on the deputy mayor's office because there's so many different agencies that are involved here, but if we're not learning from those trends, then I worry we're just going to be kind of in these cycles.
And we
forever.
are doing it because it is what it is. Like, right now, we are basically doing a lot of the individual work, right? Because, when the chief comes, quite frankly, if MPD, like, okay, she's meeting with, Chancellor Farabee and Dr. Grant, and I'm talking to Deputy Mayor Kine, because a lot of kids' lives revolve around school. And we're like, okay, we need to get as many kids in school as possible, because that still is the safest place for them. And also, there's caring adults there who can help us to identify, you didn't see them. Where are they? Like,
Mhm.
let's help us
Right.
go find them. So,
Okay. Thank you. Gun violence strategic plan.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on this plan? A lot of folks will say we have a gun violence strategic plan for the city. Now let's implement it. What is your view?
So I put an update, like, we don't disagree. I've said this before, and I really believe this. If you look at the gun violence strategic plan, it's not dissimilar from, quite frankly, some of the recommendations from 2006 and the homicide elimination task forces, that report they did from 2003. When you go back and look at the gang violence intervention plan that was done when there were Latino gang issues in Columbia Heights at the end of the 90s into the early 2000s. It's not that dissimilar from, the Safer Stronger plan that was done in 2015, 2016. So I don't disagree with a lot of the areas of it, and we are trying to implement to the extent that we can. What I am conscious of, and I say all the time, is that we also have to be real about the differences in the district that do make these kind of comprehensive plans more challenging. I can't, the executive oversees the executive. We cannot make federal partners participate in ways that other places can. We can't, and actually they can't either, because they don't, the federal government is who they are. And I'm not blaming or saying that they're not participating, but even in the simple space of people of promise, we couldn't get addresses for many of the people for the longest period of time, even though our federal partners had them, because the Privacy Act is like prohibitive in that space. That wouldn't happen in any other state, because most of that would be within the purview of like a state prosecutor, or they could work together, or the governor does that. So, when people are like, work this list, I mean, I myself was like going through scrubbing, like getting from MPD, like, they would be arrested on the gun stat list. And we're like, well, you know where they are because you did supervision, but they're like, we can't share that. We can share it with MPD. Right. So you have these kind of challenges that I don't think are fully acknowledged in the plan. I think the plan is a good strategic plan, but it doesn't necessarily always take into account the nuance of the district that makes some of these things difficult. When people are like, do focused deterrence. Yes, part of focused deterrence is an agreement from the court, the prosecutors, and everybody that will offer services. If we don't, we all agree that you then will move through the system. We don't agree in the district. Like, we just don't. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm very realistic about this. So we can get the MPD side. We might be able to get one of our supervision agencies, but then like, you know, maybe others agree. The shooting and coordination reviews, we have started them. But even in the legislation it's proposed, we're doing them weekly, actually. And, you know, it's like we found a workaround, but the prosecutorial arms don't want to be involved. And that they have their reasons. And then there was, I think in in Secure DC, a proposal to like limit what's shared. Well, that doesn't work, right? Like, so I have to find a way to make sure we're able to share the type of information that will stop retaliatory shooting. And we're doing that as workarounds, right? Because in other places, you likely would get the prosecutors and others to be like, we got to know so that we can, as part of this, we have to kind of break everything up into separate groupings of people, which takes more management. So when
Right.
people say lack of coordination, I'm like, well, I don't know if people are sitting in the same space as I am. But like everybody has good intentions, but we also have statutory things and
Right.
different reporting structures. So we are advancing as much of that as we can. And I would say that, you know, we are experiencing reductions in shooting right now that we haven't before, because quite frankly, my office vis-a-vis me, like, is very involved, right? Like on the shooting review. And now it's kind of getting to a point where people got it. And it doesn't take me personally being involved, but that we're that place with the BIs. My office sits with them every week and is like, no, but you do know this. Think about, you know, cousin, whoever, right? Like,
Mhm.
so that's what I would say.
Okay, well, I'm happy those shooting reviews are taking place, and I think some
Yes.
of those limitations are because of Brady and needing to
Yep.
supply the same
Oh,
information
yes.
to the prosecution as the defense, and that was part of the balancing act there. But I hear you from a district perspective, operations, we need to share information to respond.
And we
to
found a way
prevent
to do it. We
retaliation.
just have to do we just do a number of workarounds, right? Like we have a meeting over here with these groups of people. Then I'll be the ombudsman to the like, or we'll get one person from MPD that people will trust, and then they'll talk here, and then we do it because it's what's necessary. But I point that out because all the plans are just like, and then have a peace room. And you're like, oh, okay. Or create a citywide database. I mean, like district agencies have prohibitions and legislation with sharing information. So a citywide database would be nice, but there's a lot of things that would have to change to get there.
Mhm, I hear you. Okay. So in terms of the People of Promise program.
Yep.
The CJCC just finished working with the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform, as you know, to put out an updated People of Promise list.
Yes.
Has your office received that list?
No, but the list was just provided to MPD, so we'll be getting it soon. And I can tell you that in just speaking with Director Love, part of what they tried to do is remedy the issue that we ran into. When we got the list, it wasn't scrubbed. I had to go through like who's at jail, who's passed away, who's there. They did that work and got as much like information of the address, that type of stuff as possible before passing it on to us. So, you know, we're hopeful that that will help us, that sets us up for much more success than kind of the process we had to go through last time.
Okay, and do you know about how many people are on that list after this?
I
scrub?
don't know. I just found out that it was completed and passed to MPD yesterday, so I will find out.
Okay,
I don't think it's a significant number more. He's usually, it's there, I believe it's still in the 200s, but I will find out.
okay. And what are some of the metrics that go into that list determination?
That's difficult for me to say. I can't speak on behalf of JCR. That's something that we asked kind of, because I will say that I think it's important for us to be able to kind of update this ourselves, right? Like, it's like if you want to institutionalize things, you have to be able to know what the methodology is, and that, I'll be honest, I'm not clear about.
Okay. So in your pre-hearing responses, you included a list of expanded targeted services for people of promise and other high-risk individuals.
Yep.
And so I'm very glad that these services are being provided, but I want to better understand how they're actually being targeted and followed up on. So that we don't just have access to services, but that we are doing the follow-up. And so what does that actually look like?
So the thing is, like, it's not dissimilar from pathways where the goal is for ones to be able to provide case management, like the navigation through these services. The reason we identified targeted services is honestly some of the knowledge of what are the services and quite frankly, things that we know people have identified that they need in order to not engage in kind of criminality. And so the follow-up really, this is what the people have promised. And again, I say it's not that dissimilar from pathways of like making sure they actually get the services. So the follow-up would lie in that kind of case management piece. We called them, oh gosh, what did we call them? Because basically they're navigators, right? Like of helping, pathfinders. That's what we call them. Sorry, like pathfinders at one. Helping people to navigate through. And again, we made the list because it's like, what do we know for sure? We had to go to the agencies to say, because going to agencies and just being like, serve these high-risk people. No, the best result, the agencies have a lot of need that comes to them. So being able to really identify, this is what we are asking for access to for this cohort that will help us stop shooting yields better results than just like, we're going to send these people for you to serve, which, may or may not result in
Right.
reduced shooting.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So what do you think we do when somebody says no?
I mean, that's kind of the thing, right? So one of the things that happened with the People of Promise list is Gunstat and CJCC also decided they would track those individuals through the Gunstat process. And I was speaking with Director Faust yesterday. We're like going through sort of where are we with the jail population? Who's there? 45 of the 200 people on the list are there at this juncture as we continue to work our way through. And ultimately, whether or not we agree to it or not, we will continue to work with ONES and CURE and also CSOSA and PSA because many of these individuals have a relationship there to provide service. But if you engage in crime, MPD is going to pick you up and arrest you. Like, it really is that simple. Like we can offer people services, but you cannot engage in crime. Like so it's not like people choose, they have free will. And so that's really what happens. If you're not going to like work with us on jobs or things, and not everyone wants to, that's
Right.
just a fact.
And that's where the backstop becomes so important that people need
Yeah.
to know that there is an alternative is going to happen if you
Yeah.
engage in crime. So speaking of, we can agree on it or not, cure the streets.
Yes.
So as you know, I think, my colleague, Councilmember McDuffie, introduced a bill last week or 2
Yep.
weeks ago proposing to merge our violence interruption programs and set up a new independent agency to manage it. What is your view on that legislation?
I just don't agree with that. Like, I mean, I'm speaking on behalf here that, I definitely understand the need for the programs. And I saw the Attorney General responded and the mayor said, like, we believe in the importance of the programs working together. And I think someone asked the mayor and she's like, I don't know that I ever believed there should be two programs to begin with, right? Like, so that is a position we take. The constantly making new, first of all, I don't understand independence. Like the agencies need to be able to work with other agencies, and independent agencies will tell you that does not help them. Like having the ability to navigate through the executive side of the house, like it doesn't help an agency to be independent. So I'm unclear like that structure. The other piece is, this isn't a time, like one of, I think the challenges one's had is when you start a new agency, building an infrastructure of an agency isn't easy. It's a lot of work. And it will take a lot of time, attention, and money in order to build an appropriate infrastructure. And this, again, is not a time for that, to be like spending time on that. We want to reduce shooting. I agree there needs to be coordination. I also, would say that the NEAR Act that established this, right? Like there were a number of responsibilities that ones was to fulfill. And in the new legislation, it appears it's just VI. What happens to family support services? Do we still have a ones? Because what about restorative justice initiative? These were in that legislation establishing it as statutorily required responsibilities. Critical, like community stabilization still needs to be somewhere. Where's that going? Right? So I mean, I appreciate the need for coordination. I don't think that's the way to get there. I don't think that simply putting two people together in a new independent agency then equals coordination or cooperation or anything else. And then the last piece I would note is the Health Equity Office. DC Health did establish something. They did establish that office. It does certainly have a different name. I know because we've looked at like how the New York was implemented. So I'm unclear like how establishing that too, just I would point in that piece of legislation, a new Office of Health Equity, like what does that do with the health equity work that DC Health is doing? So I would say if what we want is effectiveness, which I believe that is, that doesn't come from the establishment of a new administrative thing that people have to figure out. It comes from, yes, we have to figure out how, and I believe these two entities merge, because like that's probably what's going to get us the most benefit. But we have spent a lot of time now, and especially this past year, quite frankly, working on like the basic infrastructures that will help one succeed. Good budgetary management, right? Like having chief operating officer and these things that you need as an agency to really have sustainability.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I appreciate that perspective. And as we think about a merger, what do you think would make such a merger most successful?
So I think clarity, one of the things that I think that has worked with the VIs is they need clarity. Like you can't have multiple models and multiple paths of authority and who's in charge. Like these are people who I think they want to do well. What do you want them to do? And so one of the things that I think is there has to be a clear chain of command. There just does. Because right now what's happening is they might work at an operational level, but with different management, they're like, it kind of depends, right? It depends on who's willing to work like on the back end here with people over here. Like that shouldn't be the case. That stymies the work. I think clear model, right? Like we sort of just, like there's these differing models sort of, and I'd be honest, I don't think either have fidelity to what the models were. Like, I believe that one's was sort of an advanced peace model and a mixture of things. I believe Cure is not necessarily being faithful to the Cure the Streets national model, because if it was, their neighborhoods would not be chosen the way they are. That's just a fact. So clarity of expectation. One of the things the VIs have said to me is even the way we're choosing locations, I work this side of the street. That is not real. I'm just being honest. Like they're like, you got to be able to work the ward. You got to make sure that if 3500 is beefing with Potomac Gardens, people are working Potomac Gardens 3500, not like our area is north of 16th Southeast and we only go to here. Like that's not real in our city.
But how do you get the balance right of providing flexibility to the practical reality on the ground for VIs?
Yeah.
And not kind of over allowing for a nebulous boundary structure that then could lead to, very little impact.
So one of the things is if you ask them, and we spent a lot of time working with them and looking, like you can work a ward, right? Most of them are like, well, I mean, I could go to another neighborhood. Like there are ways in which to do this, like why we chopped it up. Maybe there was a reasoning for that, but now that we've been in it a while, like there are ways, not every, I think Ward 3, we're okay. Like, you know what I mean? Like there are ways that we can look at within my ward, Ward 1, Columbia Heights. That might be an area where we know it's like, we don't need to bound it. We know that like you might need to work all the way up to Mount Pleasant. Right? Like it's going to be, there has to be a fluidity in this where we trust the VIs. And also identify, when we say we're working award, what does that mean? And that's where there's been kind of a lack of clarity for both. First, let's identify the people who are driving violence, which we do know. And by choosing these areas, we're kind of letting our VIs off the hook a little bit, because they'll be like, we know that. They're like, sometimes the people just go around the corner and shoot. And that's not our area, but like, what are we supposed to do? Like, not go around the corner and deal with the fact that they know this is our area we work. And so now they're just going to go around the corner and be shooting because that doesn't make sense. That's not helping us. So I would say, like, we've got to infuse, you hear this a lot from us, common sense, right? Like, our VIs, we have gotten to work with them. They're committed and they know the neighborhoods they work. They know the areas. So if they say, I could go uptown, right? Like, I could go to Petworth, even though I work, right? Like Brightwood Park, then we have to trust that's the case. But it really is then a management of, who are you working with? How did we identify that they're the shooters, right? Because that's what we're supposed to be working on here, is not poverty, systemic racism. Like, those are issues that are important, but we have to work on shooting. Our goal is to reduce shooting. Who's shooting? And so that is more of an iterative process of working together, versus I work this block of, Ward 2 or whatever. So yeah.
So how'd you come up with that one? How many violence interruption specialists are currently employed by one,
Oh gosh, I don't know. Like, off the top of my head, I don't know.
or a range?
I would have to check for you. I think it's around 70, but I'm not,
Okay.
like, I don't want to be held to
And
that.
do you all happen to know about how many are working for Cure?
I
I know
don't.
that's not your agency, but
I
okay.
don't. I'm sorry.
so as we think about the challenges with the lack of infrastructure in years past of ones, and a lot of the work that you've been doing to set up the operations side of the management perspective of ones to be successful, do you think that ones is ready to take on an influx of the Cure the Street specialists?
I do. I do.
So last year, Linda Harley Harper was directing ones and the Office of Gun Violence Prevention, and we're very sorry for her loss. And I know that you and so many in her team were extremely close with her, and that was a huge loss for the agencies and for the district. Has your thinking shifted on if those two offices should exist separately, if they should exist under one leadership, if it is the same leader, should they be merged?
I don't know. I mean, that's sort of, like, the mayor chooses the cabinet and she'll decide who's best. I think the most important thing is that the offices have to work together. And we've identified, I think, the strength of some of the offices. I think OGVP, and we believe, is excellent at helping us with data and policy side. That really was, and what Linda would say was, that office is they were the policy side of the house, and one's operational. I think that just like any space, I really do believe it's kind of my responsibility to help all of that work together. And so, and I think that the city administrator would say, I think we sat here and said the same thing when we had a roundtable on it. So if it's the right leader, absolutely. I've heard the mayor be open to that leader overseeing both offices. We're in a process right now of looking at structure of everything. What is the right structure? Do we merge things? Do we put it under? Because we recognize we have a tough budget year. That's what we're facing. And what is the most efficient, effective way for us to use our resources with our focus on public safety? And so we have to look at what's the right structure. How are we going to accomplish what we're doing in a way that's most efficient? And so I absolutely know that, I don't speak on behalf of the mayor, but I say what she has said, which is absolutely open to it being like the same leader or not, but like they all have to work together. Everyone has to.
Okay. Well, whether we can expect two leaders or one, when can we expect a permanent placement in these positions?
I like, never get ahead of the mayor, but we are moving right along with ones. And so, it is like top priority. So I would say that.
Okay, understood. And I, again, want to be sensitive to the great loss that the agency
Of course.
suffered, but we sat here 1 year ago.
Yep.
And we're told, ones need some time to get off the ground and we're doing these changes. And now we're a year later, we still don't have a permanent director. And so we do need to move
And
forward.
I'll just say this, that it's always been a priority, just so people know. There, the right leader for ones can be complicated because for some people it is who has the most experience, a connection to community, and that's one way you can go. But on the other side, you need strong administration, right? And the ability to manage a government agency, to be good steward of of finances. And kind of that skill set is one that's a little rare, like both of them together. And so you can lean one way or the other. And we've been really careful and sensitive to we want the right person. And so that is some of it. It was never not a priority. It was, there's not a ton of people like that really do have that expertise. And so, but we feel good about the process and where we're going. So,
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. We look forward to that update. So I want to ask you about the co-response teams between MPD and DBH. In years past, we have heard, on one hand, the need to provide more of a behavioral health response to people in need. I get asked all the time of who should I call if somebody is in distress, and it's not necessarily a public safety issue, but we still want someone to show up. But then in expanding those programs, we have heard a lot of concerns about safety on behalf of outreach workers and making sure that our DBH workers feel safe. And so how are you thinking about that balance, and how are the efforts of the co-response teams going, and where are we with staffing?
So, the first thing I would say is that people should call 911. And here's why. We have worked, and I don't call them alternatives to 911 because you have to access 911. You have to call 911 to get them. But on our diversion programs, one of the things, so a couple of things. One, DBH is co-located now at OUC, at the UCC, the Unified Communication Center, so that there's better communication and the ability to listen to a call to determine, right? Like, which way should this go? Is this something that requires an MPD response, or is this like a pure CRT response? We also, and I'll say this because it's, that was part of the thinking with Powerful, right? Is that creating a more algorithmic process, working with DBH, MPD, Fire EMS, DPW, DDOT, like the other two as well, will allow for a more kind of accessing of those programs, because it will be like, that is the right response, instead of all of the decision-making in that falling on the call taker, right? So that's one piece. The other thing is, the reality is that it is very different. We have seen, I don't know, this year feels like uniquely, feels unique in some of the mental health and safety challenges we're seeing, right? Like, we've had officer involved shooting, right? Like, we've had some mental health consumers who've, where it seems like it could have been a mental health issue, and then it turned. And so we are sensitive to that. I think that's really where the MPD continues to do the work, one, for training more of their officers in behavioral health, but also in kind of expanding the co-response model, because it is difficult at times. Like, like, safety has to be our number one priority for everybody. And we don't want CRT members either put in situations where ultimately you're going to have to call MPD anyway. So I think it's a work in progress. I think it's a really challenging area. I'll just say, when we went to Congress, it was something that one of the congressmen brought up, a surprising congressperson, in talking about just how sheriffs in their home state, they talk to them and they're like, the behavioral health challenges and the growth in that space, that expansion is probably the biggest challenge that they face, because it's like, which way does this go? And so, I think it's an area where, like, we do want to make sure that where things can be diverted, they are, but that we're also mindful of, like, these are our employees, and like, we don't want anybody put in harm's way unnecessarily. It doesn't help the individual who needs help, and it doesn't help our staff.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So speaking of PowerPhone,
Yes,
I understand that the transition happened today
it did.
to
Yeah.
PowerPhone. So a few weeks ago at our oversight hearing with Director McGaffin, I asked when the transition to power phone was expected. And I was told that there was sign off from MPD and fire, but not EMS, and that there was a lot of work to be done to accommodate the outstanding safety issues. So when was the decision made to make the transition today to power phone? And how was the coordination between MPD, fire, and EMS to ensure that the operational concerns of those agencies were accounted for in the technology?
Sure. So, I kind of have to like walk the timeline a little bit because the first introduction to PowerPoint was in April of 2022. And the first that was OUC. In September of 2022 is when Fire, EMS, and MPD became involved. And I actually watched like part of the process when I was chief of staff. And so the first questions and some of the process with Fire, EMS and MPD began in October of 2022. So this has been a very like ongoing process. And quite frankly, the cutoff date, the original cutover date was September of 2023, then November, December, early January, late January, early February, mid-February, late February, all to honestly make sure that people felt as comfortable as possible. And change is hard. Like, so MPD, honestly, easy, fire a little easier, EMS more engaged. I will say as deputy mayor, that there comes a point with me, with my agencies where I say, how much of this is something that really needs to be resolved before we make this change, which change is hard, no matter what. Everyone has the best intentions and really wants what's best. And ultimately we're one team, right? But we also involved Octo to say, hey, are there real concerns? Are there real concerns about the technology or otherwise? I participated in demos and watched all of that and to see like what the issues are. Any change is going to require some tweaking. There has to be a reasonable level. And there is a point where I, as deputy mayor, made a decision that we're like just looking at kind of what some of these changes, we're going back and forth, quite frankly, like you wanted this 3 weeks ago, now you don't. Like it started to really garble things. And I believe the best of intentions were there, right? And that Director McGaffin was trying very hard to be as accommodating as possible because this is a system that they work together. But there is a point where I have to say, for a host of reasons, we need to go ahead and do this. That from what I'm seeing, there's always going to be some trepidation, but that 2 years of work together almost on this means that we're going to continue as professionals to work through issues as they come, because that will always be the case with technology, but that this really is what's best for our system. This is really what's best for our residents and our employees and is going to make us more efficient and effective. And if we wait until everyone feels perfectly comfortable, especially when we have kind of the bulk of this thing where we've come to a point of that it's a reasonable amount of agreement, we're never going to get there. And so that is a decision I made, and I will like own that.
Okay. And so how do you view your role in monitoring the transition to ensure that it goes smoothly and that any of those outstanding concerns are remedied if they come up in practice?
So, I mean, in the same way I do with any of my agencies, one of the things is that like these are large agencies that have multiple levels of people working with them who are passionately engaged and otherwise. My expectation is that the directors ultimately will help to resolve some of the issues and that's what it has to be. And that I have a very, very good relationship with my directors where they'll tell me what's going on. And it is my job to help us like sort through them. So I was aware of the challenges, the issues, talking to fire, to OUC, talking to MPD just to know what's going on. I monitor it's my responsibility. They provided project plans. Where are we in the project plan? That's just kind of good management. So I saw the cutover plan. I've gotten several updates today from the agencies where they're at, and that will be the ongoing kind of check-in points of what's going on. It doesn't behoove anybody for things to go poorly, because I want to say this and I want people to hear this, because there was a lot of questions, I think, about Director McGavin's integrity. She's an outstanding director, integrous through and through, no attempt to be, not transparent. If anything, there was a hyper level accommodation going on, to be honest with you, and that many of these transitions in other systems, the 911 center makes the decision, changes it, and everybody gets on board. That isn't what happened here. She really has tried to be accommodating. So I fully expect that my directors will always let me know if there's challenges, because our job is, I'm here to support them and for us to work through it so that we get the best result for our residents. And that really has been the relationship I have with them, because their jobs are hard, very, very hard. They have life or death decisions that they have to make every day. So anything that I can do to help support them, to remove some of the weight, to work through challenges that come just because they're really in it and committed, that's my job.
Well, thank you for that. And when you talk about some of the outstanding issues that maybe we're never going to get resolved, or trepidations that some agencies had, can you provide some examples of what that looked like?
Yeah, so for each individual type of call type, there's a number of triggers, right? Like the system that are created in PowerPhone. And the best way I can describe this is for, like, let's say a call type of, we'll just use one, assault. Right? You may have a number of triggers. Someone has said on the phone, someone hit me. Someone has said on the phone, someone shot me. Someone has said on the phone, and it's a real one. Someone hit me with a hammer under the armpit. That was like one of the triggers. Like what PowerPhoto lets them do is come up with this whole list of triggers that will trigger certain response. That's sort of the piece of it where it's like, let's take all of this thinking out. Like, if you're a call taker hearing these things, well, this might be BLS, ALS, or a dual MPD. So they worked together to be like, for each of these call types, what are the triggers? And some of these triggers were getting like into the hundreds. And so for me, I'm like, okay, listen, like we may not get we were not going to agree necessarily before we launch this thing that like, this is the 200 list of triggers for this one type. What if we just start with like 50? And if we find when we're working it through, it doesn't mean that the call taker and the dispatcher can't dispatch a call. There's a whole function for them to do it. It just means that the automatic triggers, we're gonna have to work on refining or adding what will help it to be like as automatic as possible. Those type of things that was like a real one where it's like, well, you're not necessarily going to agree on the full 200. And maybe we can like scale this back a little bit so that we then start to work our way through, because all of these are programming changes. Every time you're like, but what about this? Well, we pay people at PowerPhone, like they have really good customer service. We had Octo really look at that, which we don't have, quite frankly, right now with criteria-based dispatch. There's only 3 jurisdictions using it, and all 3 of them, us, Tucson, and Seattle, only in the country using eCBD. One guy who does support. Like, so the district and the other 2, Seattle and Tucson, also were like, we're going to new systems. We didn't have a choice. We needed to change. So at some point I got to be like, okay, this is change management. This is people management more than it is the technology, which is why we had Octo really be involved, to sort of moderate and mediate and be a neutral of like, what is a real kind of technology issue, and that is like, for me, real, we need to push this back, and what is people, like, it's the change and it's the wanting to really have this perfectly down, and how much is acceptable, and that was the
Okay.
process. Yeah.
Thank you. So, and I do think, and I will continue to monitor it as well to make sure that the transition is smooth, but I do think that ongoing kind of updates is going to be really important here, because it is such a new system. I know we talked about safe passage earlier, and you did with my colleague as well, but I just want to make sure I understand, because I appreciate your points about safe passage workers not being VIs or not being credible messengers, and that is an important education both for the workers and for the community. But how are you going to be able to lean more into the work of coordinating between safe passage and school administrators, for example? We hear the most frequent criticism I hear about safe passage is there might be an issue that a kid's involved with across the street. and they're being told, well, there's nothing we can do there, or an issue that's going on inside the school building, and the safe passage workers are also saying, there's nothing we can do. And so while jurisdictional boundaries are important, akin to what you were talking about with the VI specialists of being practical in what's actually happening, how can we adopt a similar model with our safe passage workers?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the across the street thing is like training for the worker, because I think there, some of this is like, we definitely are not rigid, but like, we're much more like, this is your job. This is what our expectation is. And so I think like, as we build relationship, it's like, well, if you see something across the street, come on. Like, I think some of that, it would be like an evolving process. The larger, the inside the school thing, I think I understand schools need support, but we also need to understand that inside your school, you're responsible. And that some of what's going on is that schools utilize like VIs as behavioral technicians. And that's, that may be an appropriate role, but we also have to be careful about that, because VIs are supposed to be focused on crew-based violence. And some of that may be, but we even heard from like one's Leadership Academy people, VIs, others, that they're like, that's what we're doing, is like helping to augment like discipline in the school. And I'm not sure that that's their role, maybe. Right. So it's a work in progress of, okay, how much are you responsible for in your school? Communication is one thing. And again, like we're looking at models with DCPS and the chancellor and others of like, is there a model where we have like an alternative school model? We have VIs, because really like this is a behavioral issue. That is something we can talk about. And I'm certainly willing to talk about, but there have to be boundaries. Like, here's the thing, like programs don't have limitless dollars either. Right. So if we're asking people to be outside during certain times, but then we're also want them inside, we have to be good stewards of the money we have. And so, schools have a lot of, they might say they don't have enough. That's not for me. That's like Deputy Mayor Kine, but I don't know who they have in their schools. Right. So our job is to coordinate between school security, SROs, VIs, all of these people to see what support they need. But it can't just be regular necessarily that we're using our VIs to kind of span the wide range of whatever, because financially that's not wise. It also, the safe passage workers, they'll do almost anything because they're so passionate and care. That's also not necessarily fair to them. It may not be their role to manage like violent conduct in school. They may say they do it, but they might not be their role.
How many safe passage workers do you currently have employed?
Right now we have 179.
Across how many schools?
48.
And how are those schools selected?
So it's based upon, like, we literally look at like, honestly, like incidents around school, like basically incidents around school.
Which is similar to a cure model of violence interruption, right, for shootings? Okay. And so what improvements would you say you've seen now that safe passage is under your jurisdiction as opposed to Deputy Mayor for Education? Why was that an important shift?
I think, the Deputy Mayor so it was in out of school time grants, which is a very different, those are large grantees doing kind of school-based work. This really it is a part of violence prevention work, which is not really in the wheelhouse necessarily of DME and out of school time grants. And so the type of monitoring and not just monitoring. So we did a kind of a split of OVSJG was our granting partner because they're good with administration and understand how to work with these CBOs, which sometimes need like support on capacity building and these various things, which is not really how most out of school time grants. Those are usually larger kind of grantees who have structure and all of those things. And then we also brought like a grant specialist in our office and also our person who works with VIs in our office, working together to actually really support both the administration, like, are you where you're supposed to be? Are you adhering to the fundamentals of the grant, like grants administration, and then the operational side, like we are running the daily calls, we are doing the trainings, we are doing all of those things because we also want just there to be an integration with the VIs. And so what you've heard me say is like, we've really, and I think you heard VI say, we've really stepped in. You heard Jasmine from my office who does who's the operational lead for Safe Passage and for the work we're doing with our critical incident and VIs. That becomes the linchpin and the people that we have working with her to kind of create that continuum. So I would say that's really a big piece of the difference is like, they'll tell you we're a lot tighter. Like, we're a lot like, you weren't there. Like, we went there. You're not there. Like, you know what I mean? Or, I don't know what this charge is, but you didn't do that. Like, we're not going to be doing that. Like, so that type of thing. And then operationally, like, hey, there was an incident. It wasn't at school, but we know the kids at Potomac Garden are shooting back and forth and they go here to this school. So like, what are we going to do for a safety plan? Hey, we have a game between Jackson Reed and Coolidge. We need to cover down because we know that so we need safe passage workers, the VIs for the area, MPD, like we need you. It really is very, very granular, daily type of coordination coming from my office in that space.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So safe commercial corridors. I am very excited about this. Thank you to you and your team for getting this off the ground. One of the reasons when we set up these grants, we really wanted them to be run out of your office because they were dissimilar from other grants run out of DEMPED. It really needs to be tied to safety issues in our commercial corridors. And so thank you first for setting that up, because I know that was a new model for you all, but how are you all evaluating the applications coming in for those grants?
So we had a panel, like, and it included MPD because like when we started to see them coming in, we're like, okay, these have like very strong nexus, some of them to MPD, my office, the Office of Racial Equity, because that was important. And then also DEMPED, right? Because so much when we're talking about, like, we're really trying to be like one government. So when, DEMPED works with economic development, and this all ties together in our mind in a lot of ways, or is working with, the Chinatown task force or otherwise, it's important that we're having an integration. So it was a panel that really looked at them and evaluated, I'll be honest, these applications were strong kind of in and of themselves. And the ones that weren't were like very self-evident that because they just didn't submit like paperwork at all, or, you know what I mean? Like any sort of a proposal. These were very robust and extremely thoughtful in how they can utilize people and technology, to support safety in the city. So I think, between kind of our lens as a deputy mayor's office, and then the actual kind of operational people, DEMPED's lens, racial equity lens, MPD lens, everyone kind of brought their perspective and ranked them.
Okay. So one of the things that I've heard from applicants is that the application process was extremely onerous.
Okay.
And I always want to be sensitive to the balance of course, we want to have integrity in the process and make sure that it's thorough and that we're not just handing money out without follow-up. And so some robustness, I think, is really important. But how did you all think about getting that balance right of making sure that people don't necessarily have to spend an entire, week putting together these types of applications? And in that thinking, one of the issues that was raised too is that the grants are going to be reimbursable as opposed to at its first instance. And so what was your thinking around that?
Yeah, so we honestly worked with OVSJG and DEMPED because those to us were like two different models of granting and tried to merge some of the two. I mean, there's pieces of OVSJG that can be like very extensive, right? But then there's the pieces where they work with some people don't have the biggest capacity, right? Like, or who have some more administrative challenges. DEMPEDs are like really specific and long and like, so we tried to take, because of what the grant was and the types of entities that would apply, we really tried to merge the two, like honestly. And so, I mean, I don't know, like if that's the feedback, like we receive that, and certainly, moving forward, we'll take that. I think we're mindful, obviously, of being like robust enough where it's actually something monitorable and like able straight-facedly, because there's a lot of granting can be a little loose and, OCP has a very stringent process for contracting with the district. Grants are supposed to be easier, but this is still, taxpayer dollars. And so we want to be good stewards and like, not just be like, here's $1 million, just do whatever you want. And so I think we're mindful of that. And so we did have a range of different types of people. Some of the things, we can look at we also talk to like risk management and, we talk to all of those people because insurance requirements can be different depending on like what you're doing and what type of things these are. And, where people are talking about technology or cameras or these various things, like it kind of was a little like we had to think about all of those different things that could come up. It's important for us too that we think about liability for the district, right? Like, so all of those pieces went into it. And again, I receive if it's onerous, like we're always looking, willing to look at processes because we don't want that to be the case. But I would say on the advanced model, or primarily that we do reimbursable grants. I have seen us do like small advances up to like 10% for some grants, but the district has lost a lot of money, that way. And I'm not saying that this is necessarily grantees who would do that, but we have to be aware that when you advance money in this way, like that if people don't actually perform, it's difficult to recoup those losses, which is why it's one thing for an individual entity, but like, do you extend that to one and not, if you're extending it to a host of grantees, there's a potential that there is also potential liability in that, which is why most, grants in the district are reimbursable with sometimes some level of advance. Like we've done this with VI organizations, but we also have found some mismanagement. So that's kind of the thinking and like we know a grantee came back, but they hadn't raised that before. Like this was an iterative process where until basically they came back the third time and we're like, we can't do it. Like they had not raised that as an issue. So, I point that out because it's like the communication over like a while, like we had pre-hearing, or pre-grant conferences, people participated in all of this, like we're willing to take all of that feedback and look at it, but that's really, we're trying to like merge all these different considerations.
Okay. Thank you. So what is the status of the Real-Time Crime Center?
The Real-Time Crime Center is rounding the bend. We're waiting for some basically last pieces. We are moving very swiftly towards an opening. We will be soon telling residents how they can register into the system very soon. Telling them how they can register their cameras. And we have some other partnerships that we've been working on with residential property owners and other partners to get access to those cameras. So, I would say it's very imminent that the opening will happen, and probably before that we want to. It's always important to us that we're partnering with residents and they understand how they can help us, especially because so many come. And so, we've built a microsite and all of those things that we'll be announcing soon to residents, how they can register their cameras to give us access. And then, like I said, we've been working, you saw us with our law enforcement partners, like that piece has been done for a while. And then, our technology's been on for a while. And the third piece that we've been working on is some partnerships with larger residential property owners and others to make sure that we have good coverage in areas where we're really seeing crime. So all of that is moving forward rapidly towards kind of the final pieces being put in to make sure like we're waiting for, the third row of furniture, things like that. So the lion's share is done and we're very, very, very soon opening. So.
Okay. Do you think that's something that will be done next month?
Oh yeah. Yes.
Okay. Great. Just a couple more questions.
Okay.
What are your goals for reentry, and improving our outcomes for returning citizens? And are there policy or operational hurdles that you're finding in that work?
Yeah, so rehabilitation is very important to us. It is it's deeply important to the mayor. This is a piece that we had DOC opened the first freestanding Ready Center at the end of last year in Ward 8. It was a COVID center. We converted, working with DGS, a COVID center into now like the first freestanding ready center. And it's really, this is something that the mayor and Director Faust have talked about since like 2016, right? Like actually being able to get done. We went from like trailers and all of these different things to actually having a building. That's important because when you go there, like one-stop shopping, if you will, for it's a site for project empowerment. It was Martha's Table has opened a closet. All of these different providers are on site. That's important, right? Like for us, transition out of DC jail, which means, oftentimes for people coming back from BOP or otherwise is hard. On site there, DBH is there and DHS have permanent offices. So they're able to make immediate appointments for people who need it for like their supervision agencies that they have to actually get connected. This like is impressive to me is DMV is on site and does IDs. Like they literally set up a micro office. I think, we talk about that one piece, but it's an example of like an investment that we really are like, it's very practical. We understand that we need to invest in meeting the needs of those who are transitioning as immediately as possible. And then of course we have Morca and like, I think one of the challenges is like Morca is, they work to navigate and do all these things. We always talk about what are the largest challenges and one of the largest is housing. And so, I have met with the Reentry Action Network and others on how we can be more creative and out of the box and think out of the box on social housing or things like that to help our returning citizens. And so my I guess goal for it is to make sure that first some of it is basic, making sure we have a relationship with BOP that we're able to actually even know who's returning. Like this sounds simple and basic, but we don't right now, right? Like, so when we talk about reentry, the largest number of our returning citizens are coming back from BOP, and we oftentimes don't even know when they're coming back or where they're going to or any of those things. And so that continues to be some work. Capitol Hill like had an interest in this and helping us to try and bridge the gap with BOP. And that was a bipartisan proposal on ways that to make reentry better. And it's so something certainly that we want to take them up on because I'm a basics person. And I'm like, if we don't know if people are coming back, like it's very difficult to offer services and support. So that's one thing. And continuing to make sure we have good connectivity when people are away. One of the things that DWRS, which I think is true of no matter what, is that remaining connected is really important, which is why we, really invested in having people closer to home. We don't have that luxury because of how the district is. So finding ways to build connectivity with BOP so that we're able to facilitate connection with family and otherwise is important because a lot of our returning citizens are coming back home and have broken relationship. They don't have resources, they have broken relationship. We talked a lot about this, quite frankly, with DHS on how we can do some like family reunification work because it's very difficult to succeed if you've been away a long time and you come back to a city you don't recognize and you don't have connection to families or others. So again, like some of this sounds really basic, but I could have these overarching like ideas, or we could try to address like the real kind of practical needs, which is family connection, jobs, IDs, like those type of things. So.
And I know you talked a little bit about this with Councilmember Henderson, but in terms of reestablishing local control of our parole board.
Yeah.
Totally understand some of the practical some of the pushback you got last time you tried this, but we are hopefully in a different stage now, and we certainly would like to see it on this committee.
Sure.
I would like to see it. So what is your thinking about the best route path moving forward to get us there in the next, working on it this year?
So, I'm happy to share the legislation and all the work that was done. Like I said, at the time when people found out we had done, it was like very basic legislation. How dare you? But happy to share that. I think, it is a big undertaking. The piece that is like some of the challenging pieces is transferring case management from the parole board from the current like USPC to the district, what does that look like? Connectivity with CSOSA, because there is still like the pieces of supervision CSOSA is doing for USPC on behalf of USPC. How does that work with the district? So I think there's a lot of work to be done, and I have to be honest, we have to prioritize, like figure out what we're able to prioritize, and like, is this the right time to invest kind of the resources? Because it was going to be, I think we said $10 million, like, so things that to set up the new parole board. So like, I'm happy to share all the work that we've done, the legislation or otherwise, and we can work together on like, is this, that we have a lot, a lot of things that we have to prioritize. So, are we able to kind of work through some of the practicalities, and get the district side and then the federal side,
Right.
on board?
Okay, well, yeah, let's definitely work together on that component, especially with the bipartisan nature of it, that this is really a win-win.
Yeah.
For a lot of folks, both in the local and federal government, and most importantly, for people who are trying to get reconnected after serving their sentence. So I know that reducing crime and violence is a big priority for you, if not your first priority.
Yep.
But it was pointed out to me that your performance plan for fiscal year 2024 doesn't include reducing crime in it. This was raised to me at a recent ANC meeting, and so I just wanted to bring it to your attention.
Okay.
And
I have to look at my part. I'm sorry, like I don't,
that's okay. I just
to
wanted
be honest, I don't remember what's.
Okay, I have it here with me, but I just want to make sure that that was something you could consider adding next year very
Sure.
explicitly, that as reducing crime as one of your key objectives.
Okay.
Do you want to speak to, reducing crime as one of your, key?
Of course. So
priority.
here's the thing is there's like, I have a wide range of agencies with different priorities and different core missions, but they have heard from me because we hear it from the mayor and because we hear it from our residents. We have to reduce crime. For everything else to work, quite frankly, in our city, so my undergraduates in community health with a focus on maternal and child health. And so, I think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. At the basic level, safety is like a base level need. For us to move anywhere up that chain, we have to ensure safety. And right now, I don't think it's a surprise to you if I say that the most basic thing is reducing crime, but then it's going to take a lot of work for people to feel safe because, I met with a resident last week who's been here 15 years and he was talking about a gunfight that was going back and forth. He's got 3 children. He lives on the hill. He's like, this is like a lot, I mean, just for, we can't just have subsistence living. Like the District of Columbia is a wonderful place to live and we want people to thrive and enjoy it here. So just like for them not to be afraid of a carjacking when they, go to the grocery store at night or whatever, that is not like too much to ask, right? I don't think that's too much to ask. So my agencies understand, and across government, we understand that like you have to meet the basics before you can do all the wonderful other things, and reducing crime is a basic. Like crime and violence was too high last year. And honestly, even before then, the increasing amounts of homicide and gun violence over time was too high. And just because overall crime was coming down doesn't mean that wasn't too high. It is. So making sure that all parts of our city, people are able to be safe and feel safe is like the most fundamental thing we can do. And it's our most basic responsibility as a government, like to meet the basic needs of our residents, and to be safe is a basic need. So it's our top priority.
Thank you very much for clarifying.
Yeah.
So that concludes my questions today. I want to give you a chance, Deputy Mayor, although what you just said could be conclusory. If you have any other last thoughts you want to share, something you want to highlight that we didn't get a chance to talk about today.
Yeah, I mean, I always say it like I end where I begin. I'm deeply like, this is a huge privilege to sit in this chair. It's a big responsibility, and I'm aware of that, and I'm grateful to the mayor for entrusting this responsibility to me at this time. I can sit in this chair because of the partnership of across government, but really because of the excellent, committed 24/7 work of the, like I said, the more than 10,000 employees who are in the public safety and justice cluster, but also the across government, like the partnership that we get in PSJ like is unbelievable. Like our partner agencies jump on board. DPW will drop at a dime to do what we ask them to do. And I want them to know how much we appreciate that. I also deeply, and we deeply appreciate and care deeply about our residents and their comfort and their happiness. That sometimes in government, like people don't know the motivation, but I want them to hear from us that like we believe in public service and count it a privilege to serve the residents of the district. And that isn't just us speaking, like that isn't just a thing, it's a real thing. And so we're going to continue to work hard with everybody, right? With council, with our residents, with all of the stakeholders to make our city the best it can be. And so I appreciate the opportunity and I look forward to sitting back here next year and talking about all the ways in which we actually have accomplished and actually made our city safer and stronger. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Deputy Mayor, and I'll add my thanks to you and your whole team, your leadership team here with you today, and everybody in your cluster agencies. We deeply appreciate all of the hard work and the partnership with our committee that we engage in throughout the year to improve lives of district residents and to make everybody safer. So with that, the time is now 5:05.